So let's discuss a little bit of the Zenshin Self-Defense Academy lineage. I do not have this school or this person listed in my lineage for a few reasons. I think the biggest reason is that I probably didn't really, I only trained with this guy for maybe a year or so. It was in the early 90s, early and mid 90s in Fayetteville, North Carolina, when I was stationed on Fort Bragg in North Carolina. As I always do and did even then, one of the first things that I will do when I get to a new town, even if I'm just spending a night or two, my thing is I need to find a dojo somewhere. First thing I do, I don't care where the restaurants are, I don't care where I'm located, I don't care what hotel I'm staying in, I don't care about any of that stuff. The first thing I do is, where's the nearest dojo? They don't, recently, and of course this is 2021 now, we don't stay in a lot of hotels anyway when we travel. We usually just have the van, but the few times we have, the first thing I do is I go in, I go to the phone where the phone sits, I open up those cabinets and drawers, and I try to find a phone book. Phone books are kind of disappearing. They don't really, not really popular anymore. That's just, the cell phone thing, and people just keeping that kind of numbers in their phones, or they can just say, hey, call so-and-so, or find this, and there it is, So phone books, physical phone books in today's society kind of going the way of the dodo. But I still look, and I haven't found too many of them. So if I don't find a phone book, I will immediately go to the desk and I will ask the person that works there, hey, where's the dojo? And generally, they've always been nice. I've never had anybody not be cooperative and nice and help me out. But yeah, they'll look it up on their computers usually, and they'll find the dojos in the area, and then they'll give me a list of them. And if they know the area, and most of the time they do. There's been a couple times people's like, I don't know, I don't travel around, or I don't, I'm not from this area or whatever. But they'll usually give me directions and help me out really nice. So anyway, random off, not really off topic, but random thing. So anyway, when I got to Fort Bragg, I had to find dojos. I was wandering around Fayetteville one day and ran across a small building, and it said Dan Ryu, D-A-N-R-Y-U, Dan Ryu. I'm like, okay, it's a martial arts school. Regardless, it's a martial arts school. I'm gonna stop in and see what's going on. So I stopped in there, and the whole time I knew him, he had maybe 2 or 3 students in the year or two or so. It couldn't have been more than 3 years. I'll tell you that right now. It couldn't have been more than 3 years. Probably closer to 1 year, but it could have been 1 to 2 years. So I don't want to be inaccurate, but memory thing, you know what I'm saying? So anyway, a year, probably not quite 3 years, maybe somewhere closer to 2 years. So anyway, I talked to the guy. His name was Dan Terry. He named the martial arts style after himself. Now, don't laugh. I learned several things from this gentleman. He may have been a little bit older than me, but not much. not much. But anyway, I did learn several things from this gentleman, both martial arts and life. Now, they weren't always good things that I learned. Well, they weren't always positive things that I learned. And as an example, my Aikido instructor, Michael Bandy. Yeah, those kind of lessons, you know what I'm saying? Don't hang out with your students. Definitely don't date your students. That sort of thing. So anyway, we hit it off. I mean, he was a nice guy. He was clearly interested in finding students. He didn't really have too many paying students. As a matter of fact, he lived in the building. It was a small dojo. I would probably say the whole building truly, honestly, wasn't much bigger than these mats. I mean, honestly, it was small. But it had a small offshoot on the back. It was kind of like a big closet. And he lived in there. He kept it shut most of the time. But he lived in there. I seen it a couple times. I mean, he just had blankets on the floor. He had a small little TV in there. He had a little electric stove thing. I can't remember. Yeah. Anyway, hot plate. That's what I'm thinking of. He had a little hot plate in there. He lived in there, and he did have martial skill to teach. He did. He really did. Looking back at it, I wouldn't say that he had a lot. Like massive amounts, but he was skilled. He could teach it, and he developed his own way of doing things. He created his own system, and he was really good at it. As a side note, even if you create your own system, which I'm in complete affirmation for doing that. I did it. Zenshin Aikido Aikijitsu is my creation. So I'm all for that. Just don't name it after yourself. Come on. That's just asking for trouble. Honestly, that's just asking for people to give you crap. Just straight up. That's it. So anyway, when I started training with him, he looked at me and he said, "Oh, so how much Wing Chun training have you had?" And I looked at him kind of funny, and I'm like, "None. I've never trained Wing Chun a day in my life." And to this day, I've still never really trained Wing Chun. I've never been formally trained in the art, plain and simple. And he didn't believe me. He thought I was pulling one of those, I don't do this, but I'm really good, but I don't do this. He thought that's what I was doing. Dude, no, I'm being serious. I've never trained Wing Chun a day in my life. And he was very, very skeptical about it. I don't know if he ever really believed me, but I haven't. So anyway, I think he had some Wing Chun training. I really think that was pretty much his main style of training, and then he just kind of developed his system around that, which again, fantastic thing. I think that's great to do, and I suggest that any martial artist that has had a lot of training and that desires to teach in their own way, create their own system. I just think that's a necessity. But anyway, as far as martial arts are concerned, I think that a couple of the real important lessons he did bestow upon me was that, one, he created his own forms. He created his own forms out of what he had learned. And he had two students that were pretty consistent, and then one or two that kind of showed up sometimes. And the two that were pretty consistent, he taught his forms to. Now, I don't remember them. I really wasn't into forms. Still really not into them, but I've kind of relaxed a little bit on that. But I wasn't into forms and didn't really care. Didn't want to learn them. Didn't have any desire, need, or anything. So I didn't really learn them. But he showed them to me. And he had a couple students that he would take to the local karate tournaments and would always bring home trophies when they were doing forms and stuff. They would do their katas and stuff. Always brought home trophies. And he said, because I was never at a tournament with him, but he said they told him that he was very innovative and his katas were really good and creative. So he did have a tendency to be a little absorbently flamboyant about critiquing himself, but he confided in me. He told me, he says, and don't tell anybody. Now, it's been since the 90s. It was in North Carolina. I'm absolutely sure that no one has carried on his art. Dan Ryu is defunct and gone. Plus, he's passed away many years now. He died in a car crash in Tennessee. But so I don't think there's any problem with discussing it at this point. But he took me aside and he says, I'm going to tell you a secret about my katas. And he goes, I made those up. Because apparently he never told anybody he made them up. He goes, I made those up. And he says, and I made them up in my front room. He said he moved everything. Apparently this is when he had a house to live in. He said he moved his coffee table and his chairs aside, and in his front room developed those katas. And even today, I said, that's cool. That's awesome. I think that's fantastic. And why shouldn't I? I mean, the forms I do, I made up. So anyway, he's like, yeah, I made those up. And he goes, just don't tell anybody. So I think he understood that people kind of, martial artists in general, kind of, shunned people who was creative and developed their own stuff. Yet he didn't want people to know that he created his own katas, yet he named the entire system after himself. I don't know. So anyway, off topic slightly. I mean, jumping a little bit here. So when I was in the Army, there was a few guys in my unit that trained martial arts. There's two that I know of for sure. One of them was into more realistic martial arts. One of them was into more Chinese kung fu, flippy, twisty stuff. But anyway, the flippy, twisty guy also came to me. So I've talked before about the other guy who wanted me to go to combative training with him, and he and I were going to go through combative training, get certified, and then move over to an airborne infantry unit, and we were going to start teaching Sikaran, which was the Army martial art at the time. And I told him no, because their martial art sucked. But anyway, the kung fu guy also came to me, and of course he was a little more secretive about his stuff, and he talked pretty highly about himself too. And his style of martial art was called I can't remember, maybe Ryu. I mean, it was a kung fu style, but I think he used Ryu. Young Ryu, Y-U-N, Y-U-N-G, Young Ryu. He called it Young Ryu. And it was more based off of Chinese kung fu. And we talked a little bit. He didn't get too buddy with me. Now, I think he made up his own martial art, and again, great, fantastic, but he wasn't willing to talk about that. Now, the reason I say I think he made his martial art up, or he named it that, is because his last name was Young, Y-O-U-N-G. The Americanized version, Y-U-N-G, Young, Young and Young. So, could be coincidence. I doubt it. But anyway, so back to Terry. Dan Ryu. Dan Terry was his name. He was a nice guy, honestly. He was a nice guy. I liked him. He liked me, and we shared martial experiences. Yeah, I just don't suggest that you name the martial art after yourself. That's just really. A couple other issues I had with him particularly. One is he kind of had the bandy complex. He knew without doubt he was super awesome, and he had a lot of great stories that I don't think was true. So he took a kickboxing fight one time. Joe Louis, the kickboxer, point fighter kickboxer, Joe Louis was from North Carolina, and he was doing a seminar in a what do you call it? Just an appearance. He was going to one of these kickboxing matches that was going to be in Fayetteville, and just kind of meet and greet and sign autographs, stuff like that. Well, I had Otomic's martial art gear came out with little like bubblegum baseball card type things of martial artists. And when I've seen that, I immediately ordered them and got a copy of them, got a set of them, which I still have today, by the way. I do have a video with those on them, by the way. Anyway, Joe Louis was in that. So I have a little bubblegum card, little baseball card of Joe Louis. I thought, hey, this would be a perfect opportunity, one, to meet Joe Louis, and two, have that card. So I accomplished that. I met Joe Louis. Another story, but I am not impressed with his attitude. And he signed my card. Luckily, he signed my card before the discussion started. So anyway, Dan wanted to go to this kickboxing match because he had just taken a fight for a kickboxing match that was coming down the road in 3 or 4 months. And he wanted to watch the kickboxing match to kind of get an idea, because he didn't really have a great idea about what was going on in the kickboxing world. So, but he took the fight. So we did that. He and I went there. He came with a date, which was his one female student, which was still married. Anyway, that's a complete story of its own, which is another thing I learned from him. Don't date your students, especially when they're married. That caused him some trouble, just to let you know. Not only did it cause him some physical trouble, it caused him some legal trouble too. So anyway, yeah, that was a nasty court thing. So after the match, and we got back to the dojo, he's like, hey man, he goes, I want you to do me a favor. He says, I want you to help train me. I'm like, okay, I can do that. I can train a kickboxer. I could have trained a kickboxer back in the 90s. I can definitely do it now. Now, rules situation goes, I'm not really keen on the rules for the most part. I mean, it's, basic 8 kick minimum, stick to boxing, that sort of thing. I'm not a kicker, and I don't do a lot of kicking, but I could train a kickboxer. So I'm like, sure, I'll help you out. So we showed up the first day. I showed up to help him train, and this guy was ripped. I mean, he weighed maybe 130 pounds, probably more like 120, 125, but we'll say 130 just. Anyway, he was a small guy, but this dude had freaking muscles on muscles. His abs were like, I mean, he was freaking in shape. And so he's like, okay, let's go. He goes, don't go too hard. I'm like, I'm not going to go too hard. So I didn't. I just, just like this here. I reddened up his ribs a little bit. I mean, his skin turned red from my hitting him, but I hit him a lot. boom, 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 like this. Not hard, but when you just tap somebody a million times, it hurts. So anyway, after that one class was over, I could tell he wasn't really excited about that fight. And a couple days later, I came back to class and asked him if he wanted to do some more training for the match. He says, "Oh no, man." He goes, "I decided I didn't want to do that, and I canceled the fight." So I don't know if it was my fault. Honestly, truly, I mean, seriously, me hitting him, I know for a fact had something to do with it, and I wasn't hitting him hard, but I think me just hitting him made him realize he wasn't really enthusiastic enough to actually get into a ring and have somebody hit him that was really going to hit him. So he backed out on that. So I trained with him a little bit. He had the one thing that I have written down somewhere. I don't have it in my memory, but I do have it written down somewhere. The one thing that I did pick up from his system, Dan Ryu, was this training exercise, which is very Wing Chun. And basically it was a 1 and 2 hit combo. One was a deflect or a block and a hit at the same time. So here, you would middle block and upper punch, middle block and middle punch, and middle block and lower punch, like this on both sides, so this would do a deflection or a block, and then you would punch. So here and here and here, and he had a whole chart that was like this, middle, lower, upper, and he had a lower deflection with the middle. So basically, you were going upper, an upper block, middle block, lower block, and an upper punch, middle punch, lower punch, and you were just combining those until you hit the sequence for all of those. I think he had 3 strikes, a 3-strike one. I'd have to look at the paper. I do have it written down. I have to look at the paper to remember, but I think he had like a 3-strike thing, but I'm not sure. I think it was boom, the 1, 2, 3, that type of thing. It was very Wing Chun though. So that I would have to say, even though I don't remember the sequences, I will have to say I think that influenced my martial arts. It really did. So in that way, Dan Ryu and Dan Terry did influence the way I do martial arts just by hanging out with him. Not so much a lot of the other training, but just to hanging out with him did influence me. I don't have him written down on my genealogy. I thought about it, and then I said, that was really the only physical attribute that I got from that. Should I put it on there or not? I might do it. I don't know. I respect the guy. I did learn a lot of not only things that I shouldn't do as a martial artist, things I should do as a martial artist, but also, kind of learning, honestly, some of the same lessons I learned from Bandy. So maybe I didn't learn them quite well enough from Dan, because I went through them again with Bandy. But anyway, Dan was a cool guy. Dan was a cool guy. So eventually, along with having financial troubles because he didn't work outside of the dojo, even if his students were paying him, and I don't know what they were paying because I didn't pay him. He asked me to come up and train with him as payment. So more than willing to do that. So I've been lucky in life to find a lot of martial artists like that, by the way. So he wasn't making really any money off of the martial arts school. I know he wasn't. He only had 2 or 3 students at any real given time. I wasn't giving him any money. I don't think that the girl was giving him money. She was giving him something else, though. There was one other guy that came up on occasion. I don't know if he was paying or not, but regardless, he wasn't making enough money to pay rent on that building, I can tell you that. He was living there, so maybe he was on military disability or something. I really don't even know if he was in the military. I'm just making an assumption that he probably was, because he was living in Fayetteville. He kind of knew the military lingo. Of course, living in Fayetteville, even if you're not in the military, you kind of pick up on all that stuff because it's a military place. But I think maybe he was in the military, so he may have been drawing some kind of money from the military. I don't think he had retired from the military, so maybe it's a disability of some sort. I don't know. But eventually, my work, which was airborne artillery in the Army, just became so demanding that I didn't have a lot of time to hang out with him. And he kind of disappeared as well. Okay, so we discussed a little bit about that girl that he was having a relationship with that was still married, and that caused some conflicts physically between him and the husband, as well as issues in court. That's about the time he kind of just disappeared. So even if I'd had time to hang out with him, he kind of stopped and disappeared for a while. I know he was scared of the guy. I know he was. He was definitely scared of that husband. I know for a fact he was. But after the court date was over, he kind of stopped doing stuff, and they just kind of disappeared. So, things just went. And many years later, after I got out of the Army, I came back to Kokomo. I started my dojo, and shortly after that, I decided I think it would be kind of cool to contact him, because I wanted to get a hold of him and say, hey, listen, I have a dojo here in Kokomo. If you're not doing anything, get over here. You can crash with me. You can hang out at the dojo. You can sleep, just come and train with me. I'll help you out. So I started to do a search on the internet for him, for Dan Terry and Dan Ryu and all that. To no avail. I mean, I didn't really find anything, but eventually, and it was like a year later, I get a message from some woman who says she lives in Tennessee, and Dan was living with her, and she was sad to inform me that he had died from a car crash 2 years ago. So I'm like, man, that kind of sucks. I was really enthusiastic about, getting hooked up with him again. So anyway, Dan Terry is not at present time listed on my genealogy, but he was a really nice guy. He had information to share with me. He wholeheartedly shared a lot of stuff with me. I did get some good concepts and ideas from him. I also, kind of saw some things I shouldn't do as a martial artist, as well as things I should do. And I just liked the guy, he was a cool guy. So if anybody out there has ever heard of Dan Terry or was around Fayetteville in the early 90s and remembers the dojo, contact me. And let's chat a bit. So thank you guys for watching Bentley's Backwoods Bushcraft. Enjoy the outdoors. And thank you for showing up to the Zenshin Self-Defense Academy and listening to my probably meaningless chat. See you guys later. Thank you very much.